Welcome to AET's webinar, Intentional Learning, Teaching Students to be Self-Directed Learners, presented by educational therapist Jone Bycel. My name is Risa Graff, and on behalf of the Association of Educational Therapists, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program. The Association of Educational Therapists is the national association that sets standards and ethics for the professional practice of educational therapy and provides ongoing professional development for its members and the public. AET offers professional development programs such as webinars, study groups, regional workshops, and an annual national conference. All of these enable members and the allied professional community to stay up to date about the latest research-based findings in education, psychology, and neuroscience. AET's 2018 annual national conference will take place in the Chicago area, November 2nd to 4th. The theme this year is linking assessment to intervention, collaborating in and out of the classroom. It features Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson and Jan Chapuis. Dr. Tomlinson will connect current research to differentiation in practice and discuss ways in which educational therapists and classroom teachers can collaborate to bring about positive outcomes for students. Jan Chapuis will examine best thinking about how the assessment process and its results can be used to enhance student achievement, not just measure it. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Jone Bycel is a board-certified educational therapist in private practice in Dallas, Texas. She has been in practice for over 30 years. She has served as a special education teacher, curriculum coordinator, educational director, dyslexia specialist, and principal, and is a past president of the Dallas branch of the International Dyslexia Association. Ms. Bycel has served on the National Board of Directors of the Association of Educational Therapists, the advisory board of the Dallas branch of the International Dyslexia Association, and as an expert consultant to ldonline.org. She was previously named Special Educator of the Year by both the Richardson LDA chapter and the Park Cities LDA chapter. She has also received the Excellence in Education Award from IDA. Ms. Bycel frequently presents at local and national conferences. She is the author of Book Bites, Bookmarks for high school students, and was an instructor for online classes for the Educational Therapy Certificate Program. Every time I've heard Jone, I've learned lots of new and useful things. Please welcome Jone Bycel.
Thank you for all joining. Thank you, Risa, for that nice introduction, and thank you for all taking time out of your day to be part of this webinar. If any of you had heard me years ago, I was advocating active learning. That was something that I thought I wanted to foster in my students. And as usual, one of my students showed me the error of my ways. Several years ago, I had a 9th grader refer to me for some reading comprehension difficulty. And usually when a student of that age comes for her first session, I provide a passage and I ask them to read silently to themselves while I watch. And just, very suddenly I put a highlighter down and a pencil on the table to see if they will utilize any of those tools. And here I was very impressed. She picked up both the highlighter, the pencil. She's only highlighting chunks of words and not full lines. And she is writing notes in the margin. Now, she had asked not to read the passage I had given her, but to instead do the Odyssey since she had homework in it. And I agreed because I know the Odyssey real well, and there was going to be no problem me questioning her on her comprehension. So after she finished, I pointed to certain of the words that she highlighted, and I said, "Can you tell me why you highlighted this?" And she looked at me, she said, "Oh, I didn't think about what I was highlighting. I just randomly go through the page and highlight words so that when my teacher passes my desk, he gives me credit for doing the homework." So at that point, I realized that it was not the doing that I want to foster in my students, but the thinking. And the term intentional learning came to mind, that I really wanted my students to be intentional. I wanted them to think about what they're doing, think about their thinking. And I went home that night and I Googled intentional learning to see if that is something or whether it just came to me. And at that point, there was only one article on Google, and it was from Vanderbilt University, where they had done a very small study with college students. Now, if you Google intentional learning, there are pages and pages on Google. Okay. The purpose of any learning is, or any work, is to learn. Okay. And unfortunately, our students don't think of that. They do their homework, they do their work to complete the work. They want the A's, but they don't want to think about what they're doing or what they're learning. And so we really need to stress that learning is the goal of any task that we provide for our students. Okay. Cognition, of course, is a mental process that includes memory, attention, producing and understanding language, reasoning, problem solving, and decision making. So every task that we do will involve some cognitive methods. But it's the metacognition that we need to incorporate into our lessons. We need to have the student re-examine their processes, why they did what they did, how they did what they did, and to think about their thinking. Most of our students like to do simple learning. So many of my students will say, well, I'll go home and memorize this, okay? When you memorize something, okay, it doesn't take any thought. It requires no feedback. It's localized brain activity. An example of memorizing is like when they memorize a date or a vocabulary word, a person's name, a phone number. What we want instead is to encourage intentional learning, which is acquisition of content and skills that must be learned in more than one step and with multiple layers of analysis. We want them to apply the content and skills in ways that change thinking or behavior. We want greater understanding and retention in application. This is, of course, higher level thinking, complex processing, divergent thinking, creative thinking, and critical thinking. And this really requires the student to be internally motivated, that they do want to learn, that they want to increase their ability to hold on to the information that is presented. And of course, this includes reading, solving problems, creating goals, strategies to achieve the goals, debating topics, and this is more distributed brain activity. Okay, the role of the educational therapist or the educator is to break down all tasks into meaningful steps, to model the strategies needed for the task, to mentor and coach, to provide the learning experience, and to facilitate the learner's acquisition of skills and knowledge. It is the role of the intentional learner to question, to connect, to reflect, and to apply the knowledge to create, act, and achieve his or her goals. Intentional learners must commit to engage in the learning effort by setting goals for each task, to monitor their understanding and their progress, to actively make connections to associate greater meaning to the material, to understand and seek out the conditions in which optimum learning occurs for them, and to process the ability to apply and manage strategic cognitive efforts to achieve the goals. This is self-direction. And then, of course, the most important thing, they need to be in charge of their learning. They need to choose to take ownership of their work and their learning. Knowledge versus thinking. What does the student have to know to complete the task? I know this dependent on educational experience. That's their knowledge. What are they bringing to the task? How does the student have to think to complete the task? And that is the thinking. That's the neurocognitive processes that we want to develop and encourage. And we do this through explicit teaching. Okay. What are the critical elements of this strategy? That we break down every concept and skill into critical features and elements. That the teacher or therapist clearly describes the concept and skill. Then they clearly model the concept and skill. They think aloud as they model the skill, And they provide examples and non-examples so that the students can differentiate. They provide cueing for the students as they're going through the process. And this requires high levels of the teacher-therapist-student interaction. And of course, with everything, we use multisensory instruction, the visual, the auditory, the tactile, and the kinesthetic. Okay, how does this instructional strategy positively impact students who have learning problems? Well, by modeling the concept and the skill, the task becomes more clear and learnable for the student. Because of the high level of interaction, it allows the student to make meaningful cognitive connections. It provides students who have attention problems or processing problems, memory retrieval problems, and metacognition difficulties, an accessible learning map. We link between subskills, and so the concepts are made directly, taking away any confusion and misunderstanding. And again, the multisensory cueing provides students multiple modes to process and thereby learn the information. So then how do I implement the strategy of explicit learning? I think aloud as I perform each step of the skill. I say aloud what I am thinking as I problem solve. I link each step of the problem-solving process to the previous step. And then I talk about what I'm going to do in the next step and show why that follows what I'm doing now. I will periodically check the student's understanding with questions, remodeling steps when there is confusion. Maintain a lively pace while being conscious of the student's information processing difficulties. Do they need additional time to process the questions? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? And model a concept skill at least 3 times before beginning to scaffold their instruction and have them do the work on their own. I also ensure that the students have the prerequisite skills to perform the skill. I want them to make sure that I can't do a book on the Civil War if they don't have any understanding of what the word Civil War means, that it is between 2 parts of our country within one country. So we need to make sure that they have the prerequisites, understanding, and skills to do the task that's before them. Then to break down the skill into logical and learnable parts. I want them to ask themselves, what do I do and what do I think as I perform this skill? I need to provide a meaningful context for the skill, whether it's a word or a story problem that's suited to their age and interests of them. And provide the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile means for illustrating important aspects of the concept and skill. I could visually display word problem and equation. I could orally cue students by varying vocal intonations. I could point, circle, highlight any of the computation signs or important information in word problems. Okay, so we need to analyze whether the student that we're starting with has effective study habits. And if you have downloaded the forms I have provided, there is a study habit form, and it lists things like complete my homework to learn or get it done, create a quiet place at home to study, turn off the phone. And what I ask the students to do is to be honest and decide, do I already do these things? Would I like to learn these things, or I'm not interested? Okay, and the not interested column is a very important column because it really shows where the child is at the level. Are they ready to accept to become an intentional learner? And we have to then work their way to that. You also have the chart Set Your Targets, and especially I do this at the beginning of every new year, whether it's now as school is starting and again for the second semester for my older students. And we look at their classroom skills, their study skills, and their general skills. And I want them to think about their strengths and what areas they need to strengthen and what they think they can do to make those changes in their behavior and in their skills. And of course, any of these charts can be changed to work with younger students or adults. You also have the individual goal plan, okay? And this is something that I do on a continual basis with students, especially with the younger students. We will do weekly goal plans. And for, you know, your first, second, or third graders, the goal might be, I will capitalize the first letter of every sentence, if that is something they are consistently not doing. For other students, it might be, I will do my homework I will hand in my homework every day this week. I will have my supplies for class every day this week. You want the goal to be very limited so that they can accomplish it, feel good about themselves, and then set a new goal for the next week. Okay. Homework time should be sacred. And this is something that is very difficult for a lot of our students who are in school for 8 hours a day and then have sports or cheerleading or gymnastics, or have to go watch their brother or sister play a sport. And so most of the time they're doing their homework in the back seat of the car, or while they're waiting for their turn up at bat. And I really am against this, because when you're doing this, you're just doing your homework to complete it, and there's no thinking. This is not the intentional learner that we want to foster. And so I really meet with the parents and the children about where homework should be done and how it should be done, and that we really want it to be a sacred time. And of course, not every family will follow that, and that's I can't force people to. I can only make recommendations and suggestions and explain why it is important. But then when a parent calls up and says, well, my child is failing all the tests, I go, where have they done their homework? What have they learned from their homework all week? And then if they say, well, they're doing it in the back of the car, they're doing it on the bleachers, then we have to, that parent has to realize that has to be changed. Okay. The first step to encourage intentional learning requires students to learn to plan out their homework and studying time. And by committing to specific times, the student commits to the learning process. Okay. One of the things that research has shown us in the last few years, that a student should never study or do work for more than 30 minutes. Actually, it's 2 minutes per year of their age. So if they're 12 years old, they should be working for 24 minutes. That's their optimal learning time. But we say 30 minutes is a really good time. Okay, so if you look at this, I have the students on Sunday night sit down with their family and think about what their weekly obligations are, okay, and then make a plan. On Monday, I arrive home from school at, and each day that will be different depending on what other appointments or practice they have after school. I believe that students should have a break after their day at school, because hopefully they have put forth much energy during the day, and they really need a chance to unwind, clear their brain before they tackle their homework. What their obligations for the day include. Is it sports practice? Is it an hour piano practice? Is it a dentist? Is it coming to see me? Whatever their obligations are, they need to write down so that we can look at what time they will be home, and then schedule, depending on their age, 2 to 3 30-minute homework study periods. And they do that for each day. I don't believe students should plan for Friday. I think Friday is the day at the end of the week where they should have a free day, but then they must agree to work either on Saturday or Sunday, and that's usually for the older kids. Some of my students will email me this on Sunday night, so we can go over it and look at if it's a good plan, if we need to tweak it or make some changes. Okay. Then the next thing that a student needs to do is to do a task analysis, to think about, and this is thinking about thinking. At the beginning of the task, what kind of task is this? Do I have to read a book? Do I have to do a worksheet? Does it include writing? Do I already know what I need to do? Do I have all the information that will help me with this task? Will I need to use my reading, my coloring, my drawing, or my writing? And what are the parts of this task? Because so many students will start an assignment, and then they get to something and say, wait a second, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so you really want them to take the time, and it's just a minute or two, before they start any task, whether they're working with me or they're working at home on their homework, to think about what kind of task is this? What am I being asked to do? Do I know how to do it? Okay. Then they need to ask themselves, do I know where to start? If I don't know, how can I get help? Do I have all the materials I need? Okay. One of the things we don't want students, and especially our younger students, running and get off out of their chair every few minutes to get another pencil or to get a scissor or to get a pen or to get a certain book that they need. We want them to have all the materials at their hand when they begin their work period. Can they get started right away? If not, why? What would be preventing them? And then what is the next step after getting started? And how much time do I think this will take? And that's really important for students to start thinking about the time it takes them to do something. Okay, finishing up. Did I do all the parts? Okay, and if working with students, especially when they're taking tests, if there's a 3-part question, very often the 3rd part does not get answered. And so we want them to think about, did I do all the parts of the assignment? Does my work look neat? And that is something I think is so important to really motivate our students to do it. And with my younger students, I always say, if I put your name on this paper and I hang it in the cafeteria of your school, would you be proud that everybody would look at this? And if you cannot say yes, then you did not make the work look neat and you did not do your best. Okay, we want them to stop after each work and say, what did I learn? What was the purpose of this assignment and what am I walking away from it? I am always shocked when I'll say to students, remember when you read the chapter last night? What was the main idea? What did I learn? Oh, I don't know. I just read the pages. We really want them to take the time to think about, what did I learn? What questions do I still have? And then to start evaluating their work. What part did I do best? What part do I need to improve? And of course, am I proud of the completed assignment? Okay, and then you also have this, you have the time estimation sheet, you have a weekly work study log. And of course, I don't give these things to every student. You need to look at the needs of the students, the difficulty that they're having, and then provide them with aids that will keep them on track. Okay. One of the things that we need to do is create a study plan. And I usually create study plans with students 4 days in advance of a test. And how often have you heard one of your students say, oh, I really don't understand this, so I really need to study? Well, we have to let students know they cannot study things they don't understand. So first I have them discuss, what do I understand? And so they mark down the skills of what's coming up on the test that they do understand. Therefore, I will study this information for blank minutes per day for blank days. Now, areas I do not understand. Therefore, I need to meet with my teacher and ask. And unfortunately, a lot of our students don't know what to ask or what they don't understand. And that's where we'll come in and help them pose the questions to get better understanding. Borrow notes from a friend, work with a study buddy, okay, and then I will study this information for blank minutes per day for how many days. Okay, they need to also think about the reasons they lost points on previous tests. And what I have them do, which I think I'll discuss later on, is actually make a checklist on the top of their test of why they lost points on their last test, so then they can use that while they're proofreading. Did I do this time? Did I do this time? Did I do this time? And hopefully not lose as many points for those careless errors that they have done previously. And always have them write down the teacher's comments, because I want them to really think about what the teacher's saying. Very often, and especially if your students go to public schools, they're not allowed to bring their tests home. And so I have them take this form into school and meet with the teacher in the morning. And so I need to see the comments. I need to see the reasons why points were lost so that we can help them make an appropriate study plan for the next test. Okay. Then additional information I must know for the test. And there's your study schedule that they would do for 4 days. Which memory techniques will I use? And I have gone through with my students different memory techniques depending on their age level and their skills. And so based on what we have done, they would list that. Okay, what mnemonic devices have they created? Okay. How do I study for tests? Note-taking. And that is something that is very important to encourage. In some of the workshops that I've done in some of the local schools here, I've got teachers to try to encourage note-taking by that if students will handwrite notes, They may use them for quizzes, so it gives the students the ability to use them and then have them to study for the test. It helps we want the student to engage with the material. Of course, note-taking does that, highlighting, annotating, and then of course association acrostics, acronyms, and mind maps. All of those things are things that I have worked through with my clients for them, and we pick out which ones are the most useful for each student, and we really try to encourage for them to use them on a consistent basis. And one of the most important things is to have the students learn to become flexible with their thinking. Do not rely only on memorization. A lot of times they will, and Quizlet is a good means of studying for tests, but you're only getting the answer in one way. And so I like to have them create mind maps too, put a question in the middle, and what information can answer that question, and to come up with at least 3 or 4 different ways of answering that question so that they're associating the material rather than just memorizing question and answer. Create a test for a study buddy, and I love for the students to do this, and my 4th, 5th, and 6th graders will usually do this. If on Monday night, if the test is on Friday, if on Monday night they write a test for their friend, and they write a 15-question test. By writing the test, they're studying, and they're thinking of their work and thinking about what is the most important information that is coming out of this chapter. What do I think my teacher would ask? Then on Tuesday, they exchange tests with their study buddy, and then they have to take their study buddy's test. So again, here is a way of studying because they're answering questions that their friend thought was important. Then they again change it back, they correct the test, and now they have 2 different practice tests that they created and their friend created to study for 2 nights before the test occurs. And of course, use Quizlet, Study Stack, or Study Blue depending on the class and whether it will work. And then, of course, one of the things we want to teach the students too is to proofread their tests. And I always tell them to take a mental vacation for 1 minute. This allows them to clear their mind and give them the opportunity to see their test with fresh eyes. They could go to the beach, they could go skiing, whatever they want to do. I have them try to reread the directions for each section of the test and to make sure that they have followed the directions, and hopefully they have underlined the different parts of the directions prior to starting the test. And this will allow them to be sure that they have answered each part of the question. Okay, and then I also provided you with a list of terms that might be on the test. And I go through those terms with my students, especially with the older ones. They really have to understand the difference between define, detail, analyze, compare, comparison, contrast. Because often your older students are losing points because they're not following the directions of the test because they don't understand what the word is asking for. Okay, to review their tasks in a different order, to check their answers by covering their answers with their hands and then answering the question again. With multiple choice questions, make sure that they have read all the answers. Did they eliminate choices? And remember, they're always looking for the best answer. With true and false questions in your mind to think about what the true one would be for correction. And of course, when they receive their test back, they need to make a list of errors and add them to their checklist for proofreading on the next test. Okay. And then the test analysis is, you should have a form of that too. I lost points for, and to list all the ways they lost points. And one of the important things for students to realize is, did they have the information in their notes or the text or not? Because those are 2 different problems. If they did have the information, then they didn't study the proper material or they didn't study it effectively. If they did not have the material, then they need to ask themselves, where was I supposed to get that? Am I not listening in class? And so those are key questions that we need to determine the answers to make sure we're helping our students and clients the best way we can. Okay. Was the information I got wrong in my notes? If not, where did this information come from, the text or class? And I have them find the page number in the text or circle the information in their notes so that they have to be accountable for that information. Did I plan my studying time well? And then have them think about what changes they could make to be more effective for the next test. And even if the teacher doesn't require it, I have them correct all their errors on their last test. And for the students who do not get to take the test home, I have them go in early in the morning or during their study hall to go in and correct the tests. Okay. Now, getting into reading, using strategies to understand what we read and how do we get the answers, okay? And the students have to realize that there's a difference between questions. Is the answer right there? Is the answer in the text? Okay. The questions usually have very similar or the same words that are in the sentence in the text. Okay. Then there's also the thinking and the searching. The answer is in the text, but it may not look like the question. The words in the question will be very different than how it is worded in the story or the passage. And so we might need to look to several places to connect the ideas to be able to find the answers. Okay. Okay, then I think about the author. The answer is not in the text. So I need to use ideas from the previous readings. What has the author been saying all along? And what do I know? And how do I combine that to come up with the answer for this specific question? And then sometimes the answer is not in the text. The author has not given us any clues, but we need to use our background knowledge, our thinking skills, and our experience to come up with this answer. And that is why I think it's really important to give students the prerequisite knowledge for any book that they might read. And a lot of ways I do that, I'm not doing a reading comprehension workshop, so I didn't include a lot of that, but I'll have them do what I call a scavenger hunt on the computer, where I'll give them questions relevant to the period of time or any of the historical events that are in the story, for them to find those answers and have that general information to go with them to that printed page. Okay, we also want to develop self-talk while they're reading. Before the reading, they need to ask themselves, do I know anything about this story or the author? Always to think about what the title means. What do I think the story will be about from this title? Okay, and then after reading the first paragraph, do I know the narrator, the point of view, and the setting? And even with your youngest kids, you need to be having them become aware about whether it's first person or third person. What words do we look for? We look for I, we, us, our, for it to be a first person. We look for he, her, a name, or they, for it to be a third person. Okay, if you look, these are what I call thought bubbles, and what I do for a lot of the students is I actually print out thought bubbles on stickers, and I'll put them next to their paragraphs, and so that they can write their thoughts in it. One thing about most of my students, if you give them an assignment to do, they will do it. If you ask them to do it on their own, they're not always as willing to do it. This one, This Is Not a Good Island, would be a question if my students were reading Lord of the Flies, and on the very first page, I will ask them, highlight all the words that describe the island. In the margin, think about, is Golding saying that this is paradise? And that was a thought that my student wrote, this is not a good island, and used the words creepers, witch like, cry, and scare to prove that point. Okay. Okay, and again, these are just thought bubbles that I had taken off from some of the students' pages. Okay, you also have my bookmarks for literature and my bookmarks for textbooks. I had included them in the handout. And what I do is I print them out and I laminate them and have the students use them as bookmarks so that they always have them in front of them while they're reading, okay? And so the questions that I always want them to ask, what do I think the title means? Who's telling the story? Where's the story taking place? What is this paragraph saying? What new information have I learned? And if they get into the habit of doing this paragraph by paragraph, they're always amazed at how greater their understanding of the material is. Bookmarks for textbooks. I am always amazed. I could take a 10th and 11th grade and I'll say, let's look in the index, let's look in the glossary, let's look, and they say, what is that? The table of contents. They don't know what each one of those things offer to them. It is very important for students to become familiar with the textbook and to see, are there focus questions? Are there summaries? Are there vocabulary for each chapter? Do we need to look at the maps? Do we need to look at the illustrations? What information do we receive when we look at that? And that's important for them to have that practice to do. Okay. So we always want them to continue to monitoring their learning, and I found this when I did intentional learning. To always ask what's happening, why is it important, what don't I see, how do I know, who's saying it, what else, what if. And I just thought that was an interesting way of summarizing a lot of the thinking that an intentional learner must do. Okay. I loved this quote. He is, of course, an author and a philosopher, and I give this to all my students because a lot of students, especially the younger kids, have a really hard time writing in their books. They think that that is wrong and they shouldn't do it. And by going through this quote and talking about it, it gives them permission to highlight and annotate. Okay. One of the things that, students will always say to me, I'm told to go home and highlight and annotate, but I don't know what to do. And if you look at your students' books, you'll see that almost every word on the page is highlighted. I know that there are definitely different views of what highlighting should be. There are teachers who have students use 6 different colors, one for character, one for setting, one for plot. And I think that is more confusing because you have to keep concentrating on, well, what color do I need for this? What color do I need for that? I want highlighting to be very simple, to really just highlight chunks of or individual words that will pop out at me to give me a mind clue of what was read on this page, okay? I don't have them highlight as they read a paragraph. I have them think about the paragraph, read the paragraph, think about it, and then go back and highlight. And so for students who I'm just starting with, I will go through the first few chapters and go page by page and tell them and give them cues on what to highlight and what to think about as annotation. So this is from the book Maniac McGee, which is a typical 4th through 6th grade book. And if you see, like on page 5, I say highlight the name of the main character, his real name and his nickname, where was he born, what happened to his parents, and that you will need to write this in the margin. Okay, I'm really teaching these kids what we highlight and what we have to write, what caused the crash, how old Jeffrey was, and so on. Okay, then in the margin, think and write. Who's telling the story? Again, you want them to, that was the important thing on that page, is to really keep in mind who's telling the story. On page 6, again, highlight, and in the margin, think and write. Why does Jeffrey scream during the recital? Nowhere does it tell us that, but I want them to begin thinking about the actions of the character. Okay, then you can also, with the older students, this is Animal Farm. And again, I go through, as I said, the first few chapters. This is the chapter 1. For the older kids, I don't go page by page. I will really go by chapter. And so I give them, again, what to highlight. Description of Mr. Jones, why there was stirring among the animals. And these are things they would highlight, and this is what they would think and write about. Why is the major delivering this speech now? What is significant about the animals, how the animals arrange themselves, and so on and so on. And by doing this, I'm at least helping them learn what is important and what is not. Then for the rest of the chapters of the book, I will just give them guiding questions. I won't tell them what gets highlighted, what gets annotated. And I do that in my book, and then we can compare. And the discussions between you and your student were like, why did you highlight that? Why did you think that was important? I didn't highlight that. Do you think I should? All of that causes them to think about what they did and why they're doing it. And that is what our whole goal is. Okay. And then what I do for my students, and especially for the younger students, I create bookmarks for their writing. And so, you know, for the younger kids, did I capitalize the beginning of sentences? Did I capitalize all my proper nouns and I? And again, these changes as new skills are learned by them, okay? For proofreading content, do I have a strong, clear thesis with an argument position? Did I embed my quotes? Did I elaborate and analyze? Did I use literary present tense? Again, you're doing these bookmarks individual for the students. I have, you know, students who go to some schools that do not allow to-be verbs used in high school. And so did I eliminate my to-be verbs? You know, did I use appropriate transitions? And so once you have a form on your computer, it's so easy to individualize for each student. Writing checklists, and again, I do these, I print them out on cardstock and laminate them. My students have it. I actually just got an email from a teacher yesterday from a student that I worked with over the summer, and she asked if she can use her writing checklist in class, and she's a third grader, and the teacher emailed me and said, what a great checklist. Would you be willing to send it to me so I can have all the students use it? And that's always my pleasure. And again, you would do it specific for the student. Did I indent the first sentence of each paragraph? Do my sentences begin with a capital? Whatever you have been working on with the students, that's what you will put on the checklist and make them accountable for. Okay, advanced organizers. And a lot of people confuse advanced organizers with graphic organizers. Advanced organizers are things that you do prior to the task. Okay, and what this does, it gives learners the expectations for the given activities. It helps them to prepare mentally for the material and the language to be presented. It helps them to recall and transfer prior knowledge. It provides a bridging strategy that connects one unit to another, and that is so important for our students to see that what they learned yesterday helps them learn today. You know, as I said, my students always teach me things, and years ago, one of my students really brought that, you know, to my mind. She was starting second grade, and I was so excited to hear how her first day of school went, because she had a horrible first year, and we worked all summer long, and I knew she was ready to start second grade and be successful. And when I said to her, how was class today? She said to me, sit down. And of course my heart sank. And I said, what's the matter? And I said, were you able to do the work? And she says, yes, I was able to do everything. So I said, then what is the problem? And she said, I don't think my teacher will be satisfied with that. I think she's home tonight thinking of brand new things for me that I don't know. And so it starts all over again. And so we have to help the students see how what they learned yesterday helps them with what they need to learn today. And so that they don't have that fear that everything is new, you know. And so the rationale of advanced organizers is in front of you, and so I don't need to go through all of them. But examples of advanced organizers would be a preview of vocabulary, to take out some of the more difficult vocabulary. And if it's with very early readers, I take out sight words that we might not have gone through, or syllable types that we might not have gone through, put them out, go through them, and that they know that when they come to that in the book, I will help them with those words because I don't expect them to know them. Giving them a lecture outline or full lecture notes. A closed procedure of lecture notes would be, you know, and this is when I'm working with students to help them work on their listening comprehension and taking notes in class. This, of course, is for my older students, my college students. And but this is something that teachers can do, okay? Guided questions, preview of content, word guide, background history. Those are all examples of advanced organizers that the therapist or the teacher will do prior to doing the task. And then, of course, graphic organizers are done during the task or after the task, which helps us to show the relationship between the concepts for them to be able to associate all the information and to enhance the understanding, the organization, and the retention of the information that they were presented with. And then These are just some additional ideas and resources when they're trying to study, to come up with some crazy phrases, make up wacky sentences to help remember the names, the places, or events in a specific order. Of course, acronyms, we do that, a real or nonsense word, where each letter in the word is the first letter of something you were trying to remember. My students love to do this, and what we do is I create actually a book that if a student comes up with a really good one, they write it in the book, and then I share it with other students who will thank them, and it becomes a really nice experience, empowering experience for the student. Cartoons, a picture that they can draw that will help them remember key information. Organizing, strategy cards, an index card with a question, a strategy for remembering that answer on one side, and then the answer on the other. 2-column notes, and that's my favorite way of teaching them how to take notes, is organizing the information to key IDs and details. And then, of course, the mapping and the webbing, which is a visual way for them to organize their main ideas and supporting details. Prioritizing, and that's the think box, which I was telling about, like on the right-hand corner of the task, I have them put their memory strategies, any ideas that they need to concentrate on, points that they need to remember from their list of mistakes that they made on previous tests. And then that becomes their checklist at the end. And then to mark questions that seem too difficult to answer right away and come back when you have the time or give an additional hint from other questions. And then, of course, checking to take that mental vacation and check their personal checklist. I have students do this almost, at each session to be able to rate their day. I always say, what was your day at school like? What, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Why did you rate that day? And what could you do tomorrow to make it the best possible day? And again, we're giving the student the opportunity to think about what they have done and what kinds of changes they need to make. Okay, love this quote: studying without desire spoils the memory and it retains nothing that it takes in. Leonardo da Vinci. And then if we want our students to be intentional, we need to be intentional as educators, as therapists. And so when you see, a teacher saying, class, I got a lot of material to cover, so to save time, I won't be using vowels today. Okay, we can't expect the students to think about what they're doing when the teacher is presenting work like that. Or this is another example. I don't like to give a lot of homework, so just read every other word. So again, we're not asking the students to learn, we're just asking them to do an assignment. I listed some resources that I constantly go to for insight, inspiration, and ideas, and so hopefully you'll find some of them useful too. Okay, any questions now?
Hi, Joan. There are several questions. One of the questions was clarifying how much homework should be done. And I think everyone heard you say that homework sessions should only be 30 minutes at a time.
Right.
So the person wanted to know whether you were meaning that there should be many sessions of 30 minutes at a time. And do you have a feeling about how much homework people should do at different ages? And do you ever cap the homework or tell a parent that a first grader who's spending 2 hours is spending too long?
Okay, homework I think has been misused, and one of the things that some of the more competitive schools in New York, like Dalton and Trinity, and I think there's 5 or 6 of the better schools in New York. They have actually signed a pledge that they will not give high school students more than 60 minutes of homework per night. And the reason why they did that, they said, we want our students to be active during the day, be wide awake and ready to participate in all their classes, and that homework is just to be a practice or review of something that they have learned in class. And so, I think that's a great idea about homework. Unfortunately, I get homework assignments. I get parents texting me, faxing me, emailing me pictures and say, what is my student supposed to do here? What is my child supposed to do here? There's no instructions on the page. They did not do the first two examples with the students in class, and yet they gave them a packet of 5 sheets to do for homework, okay? I try to, help the teachers understand the purpose of homework. Different schools will have different practices, but I think we do know that a student can only retain information for a certain period of time. And so when students will say to me, I studied for 4 hours straight, there's no way they took in any of that information because their brain was overloaded. And the analogy I always give is with like a sponge. If I go soak up a puddle, there's a point where I'm going to have to go to the sink and squeeze out that sponge in order to take in some more water. That's what their brains need. They need that chance to squeeze it out. And we're talking about a 5 to 10 minute break, and they're not going to go onto a computer game that's going to take 30 minutes, but they can just relax. They can close their eyes, take a little mini vacation, answer any phone calls or texts that they might have gotten during their study period, because that's one of the things that I ask students to do, is to shut off their phones while they're doing their work, especially the older kids. If you've ever seen the app Forest, which is especially the younger kids love it, they could set the timer on Forest for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And if they do not touch their phone for that period of time, they are growing a tree. And once they grow a garden, this company actually plants trees in needed areas. If they touch their phone before their time limit, they watch the tree die. So they have killed a tree. So the little kids love that. Your elementary school kids love that, and they love to see if they can build a garden throughout the week.
I love that. And before I ask the next question, I want to announce to all our participants that on September 4th, at 10 a.m. Pacific or noon Central, there will be a virtual study group to discuss the presentation and to ask more questions. And I think if you go home and look at all of the wonderful handouts, you're going to have more questions. Here's another question.
Sure.
For reading comprehension questions, how can you read every book for every student and come up with those questions?
I do. Okay, and usually, if you work with students from basically the same schools, okay, once you've read a book and you've highlighted and written the questions, they're on my computer. Every summer, like this summer, I had to read some new books and read some great ones. It exposes me to books that probably I would have not chosen. I read The Inquisitor's Tale this year, which was a new book that one of my eighth graders had to read. The Killing of the Flowers Moon, which was and such an interesting book because it's a true story about the Osage Indians and how they are the wealthiest population because of the rights, and all these white men were marrying them to kill them to get their money. It was fascinating how the FBI was brought in. So I enjoy reading these new books. I asked the schools for the summer reading list in May, so that I do have a month to start reading and preparing any questions that I need. And then during the school year, I went on all the syllabuses this week to see what they will be reading, to see which books I don't have, and then I'll start reading them over, the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Yes.
So another person asked, these are great strategies and resources, but how do you connect them to empowerment and self-awareness? What kinds of things do you say as you're using them with your students?
Well, okay, so then when they're thinking out loud and I go, what a great thought. I am so impressed that you were able to come up with that. Okay, and then you see the smile on the face, okay? When they go in and they can participate in class because they truly understood that chapter, or they do well on a quiz, that's the empowerment, because for the first time they're understanding. It's and that's our whole goal. I kid with the kids. It's like they're saying, "Well, I'm memorizing," and I go, "You're like Teflon pans," and they don't understand what Teflon is. We go through the thing how nothing sticks to the Teflon pan; it goes right off, and that's when you memorize. That's what happens. It just goes right off of you. 2 days later, you're not going to remember what you learned, what you thought you learned. And so we want to encourage that thinking, and you do it through positive affirmations of how they're doing, or what a great thought, or I'm so impressed that you're doing this, and look how well you're doing. Your typical, being the cheerleader for them.
So you're actually labeling and making that connection verbally all the time is what
All the time, you know. And what I do with my students is, especially with my younger students, we keep spirals, and I date every work, and then I'll say, and then when they'll do something today, and I go, look, let's look at what when we did assignment just like this 3 weeks ago, let's look at the difference in how you were able to do it, and tell me the difference. And they'll go, well, I was able, you know, I remembered to capitalize everything. I said, exactly. How wonderful. Look at how much you've learned, how much you've grown. You know, always trying to do that with the students.
Do you ever use physical exercise as the study break? And what do you see as the impact of doing something physical?
You know, sometimes, like, has anyone ever seen the Laughing Yoga Man on YouTube? And so I will put that on, or the kids will love to watch dog videos or cat videos. I like them to laugh. I like them not just to physically, but to change their affect. You know, sometimes when they come in and they've had a bad day at school, they got sad faces on their papers, which blow me away, you know. Well, I want them to just to start feeling better about themselves and to start laughing. So maybe we'll put on some funny cat videos or dog videos or the Laughing Yoga Man, and then we get to be able to work. But usually I don't have them do much action because, especially with the little kids, it's really then hard for them to motivate them to sit still afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you ever have a problem with people who just want to stay very passive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. And, you know, and so it's interesting. Like with, let's say, the novels that I read, I made a practice test for every novel that the students had to read over the summer. So when they go back to school this week and they have a practice test, they have tried one and they had it studied. So when students came to me and I go, where's the highlighting and annotating? Oh, I didn't feel like doing it. Then they don't get to see my practice test.
Okay.
Okay. You know, I always say to them, I'm not going to do more work for you than you do for yourself. I am willing to do anything I can to help you access the learning and to help you demonstrate the learning, but I will never do your work for you or more work on your work for you. Yeah.
Well, I think it's great to just put that out there for, you know, for them. I think that's all the questions we have right now. I also want to repeat that the virtual study group will be September 4th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and there will be a flyer about it on the AET Facebook group and the Facebook page. And I think that Devora has put a link in the chat room to that flyer. So if you go to the chat, you can see the link right now. 1 minute. I'm having a slight technical problem myself. I want to thank everyone for coming.
And I apologize for my inability to use my mouse effectively throughout the whole webinar.
Yes, and this is Nan, and we all very much appreciate your staying with us for so long, because Joan had a lot of dynamite information to share with us.
I want to invite you to join us on October 9th when Marion Marshall, head of the Educational Therapy Program at Holy Names University in Oakland, will present a webinar entitled Conducting Assessment, Best Practices for Educational Therapists. Please share your information about AET's webinars with your colleagues and clients. If there are any more questions, you can submit them, and Ms. Bycel will get a copy of the questions. Joan, thank you again. You've given us a ton of information in your talking, and your handouts are just fantastic. I think that all of us are going to go back through them and start integrating them into our practices. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and please feel free to email me with any questions, and I'll be happy to answer any of them. Okay.